So here's a dilemma. We're all faced with this as injectors and even as just friends of people who have aesthetic treatments. What if someone is clearly overdone and is going around thinking they look amazing, but they actually don't? How would you handle that situation? This is a really interesting topic because we all face it at various points, and it's tricky because none of us want to cause harm to patients, even though they already are overdoing themselves. How do you handle that? So why is this tricky? I think it's tricky because we are all intuitively aware that there are multiple factors that make someone happy, and it is possible that someone could be overtreated and happy, and then you could tell them about their overtreatment and it could make them less happy, in which case you've done some harm to them. And we don't want to take that risk. Of course, if you're the bearer of bad news, even if you're correct and they end up having a better treatment, it could still harm your relationship because no one actually likes to be criticized. So this is another factor that stops people speaking up. Finally, there may be some small dark part of you who actually wants to criticize them. Maybe they've offended you in the past and you just want to use some way at getting back at them, disguising it as some sort of concern. I think that happens too, sadly. So how do we approach this? First is be really clear on what your ultimate goal is. For me, the only reason why you would do this is because you have the other person's interests at heart. Make sure that you're at that place before you even attempt any of this, because it's really important to get it right, that they are aware that you're acting in their best interests and that you indeed actually are doing that. So what are the decision-making processes behind the scenes here? I believe that we are all trying to orient ourselves using different methods. So if you took the aesthetic model on its own, then your only justification for telling someone that they are overtreated is just that they are overtreated. And you make the justification to yourself that you are officially and technically correct, and therefore you can tell them whatever you like and be damned with how it affects them psychologically because you have the aesthetic rules on your side. Now, I know there are many people in this industry and people out there in the world who will use this as the sole justification and feel very confident in their ability to do so. But I think maybe we should consider the other ways of making the decision too. So let's consider the social justification. So this would be the social model of decision making, where your justification is that other people are not reacting well to this person. And this is certainly a valid concern because, as I've said in many videos before, humans are all about collaboration. Our ability to collaborate with people is vital to our survival. So if your concern is that the patient is no longer going to be able to collaborate well with other people because they look so overtreated, this could be a valid reason to interject. However, you must also consider the psychological justification for this. Now, if the patient is really happy and loving life, but some people don't like their face, this could still be, on balance, better for them to have overtreatment than if you were to completely have no treatment, for example, knock out their confidence, and then everyone else is fine with them, but they also aren't collaborating well because they don't look like a confident person. And this is where it gets tricky. And this is the final model to consider, which is the psychological model. And most people use this as a justification for overtreatment, which is if the patient is happy, I will overtreat them because as long as they're happy, then I've justified my particular intervention. This is also too narrow if you use it on its own. And this is why what we really need to do is to combine all of these together. And that is what essentially the medical model is. So we are making a decision with the patient's overall health at the center of it. And this is how you should approach a patient who's having overtreatment. Now, the problem is that if they're not a patient, for example, if it's your mum or your auntie, they are not actually seeking your advice. And this is where it gets most difficult. How do you tell someone or try to guide someone or influence someone when in fact they are not asking for your help and in their world, everything is fine? For me, this starts a lot with how I would deal with it in the consultation. You have to start exploring their relationship with their face in a way that is on their side. So we're not doing this in a judgmental way, but you're actually curious. Ask that auntie or your mum who's had a bit too much, what does it mean to them to actually have that treatment? What is it that they love about that result? That conversation will immediately, hopefully, get them to open up and be positive about it. It depends a lot on how you ask it, but if you phrase it well and you're genuinely curious, you'll get them talking about the topic. The next thing is if you actually want to influence them, a really good tip in life in general is to ask for permission to do that rather than just do it. So if you walk up to someone in the street and say, your haircut isn't quite right at the back, they're likely to be offended no matter how right you are about the haircut. But if you create a situation where you ask them for permission to give them some feedback, they are just a little bit more open to it. And the same with faces. So can I give you some feedback? Would you be open to some feedback about something that I've noticed, or would you rather manage this all on your own? Now, that's still an awkward question, granted, but it's better than just saying, I think it looks overdone, because it's got them already open and looking for the answer themselves. So ask for permission. And then when you start to give them permission, a great tip I learned when I started managing people is to give them what is often called a shit sandwich. Now, what that is something good, something bad, and something good. So you start with something good, like I think you really maintain yourself really well, and I really love certain treatments, then the shit bit, but I think you're a little bit over-treated in your lips. And then the good bit. If you were to get that right, I think you're doing amazing for your age. It's that kind of structure of something good, something bad, and something good that overall will preserve your relationship with the person and make them feel that you genuinely care about them, but also give them the message that they need to hear. Of course, this is only once they've given you permission to actually give you that statement. Now, overall, just another reminder that we are not only obsessed with the aesthetic. It is possible that someone could be happier and better off and overtreated in some certain circumstances. And it's also possible that they are completely oblivious and that things are much worse for them than they realize, and you could do them a great service by having this conversation. But we need to pay attention and think about all those domains of health, the psychology, the aesthetic result, and how they're engaging with people in life. And make sure that you're genuinely on their side and not just criticizing them. I'm sure most of you are like that. If you've got their best interests at heart, the average person will be grateful if you're on the money and your advice is good, if you've done it in the right way. But don't walk up to people in the street and tell them. I think that's a little bit harsh. So this is obviously, it's much harder if they are not your patient. If they are your patient, implicit in that arrangement is that you are to give them some advice, I think. You still need to structure it carefully so as not to cause harm. But at the same time, that's a lot easier than just someone who you know or someone who you see in the street who you think needs your help. Now here, I would say my biggest advice would be is to be humble in that situation. Humans are complex. What makes them happy is complex. There are plenty of happy people who have body modifications, tattoos, all sorts of things which make them happy but are not part of the medical model. And it's also possible to do aesthetic treatments in a way that isn't part of the medical model. So people who look obviously augmented could, in theory, be better off for that. So stay humble, investigate it carefully, try and separate out the psychology, the social, and the aesthetic, and try your best to always act in people's best interests and be delicate with it. But I'm interested, have you got friends and family who are overtreated, who you're desperate to say something about? Have you tried it and got some sort of feedback, either good or bad? Let me know in the comments down below.